I guess, adapt to fit the circumstances here, but really what we're looking to do here is to create a session where there is a bit of interaction, but mainly a lot of content, because ultimately what we want you to do is to step into your next interview presentation with real confidence. So in the presentation today, the main focus is going to be on the following areas. Firstly, we're going to explore the question, why do employers ask for presentations? Why is it that employers are asking for presentations more and more? And I'm always surprised when I ask people this question, the responses I get, because quite often people are completely off the mark in the thoughts as to why employers are asking for presentations. The next thing we're going to look at is the 8 biggest myths about presentations, because one of the things that I have found is that when it comes to presentations, there's a lot of mindset issues, a lot of things go through people's heads about what they can and can't do in relation to presentations. So what I want to do in this presentation is to help you bust some of these myths that often swim around presentations. Obviously, nerves is always an issue for people, and we're going to spend a bit of time just talking about some really simple but effective techniques for dealing with nerves, because the reality is you can never completely eliminate nerves when it comes to presentations, but you can do some things that can actually help you along the way. I'm going to introduce you to a 7-step process, which is really something you can take and use time and time again to both create and deliver powerful presentations almost on automatic pilot. Now that might be a big claim to make, but I've literally used this formula myself for hundreds of presentations, but used it with hundreds of clients, and it really does work. So I'm looking forward to sharing that. And as Guy said, we want to leave some time for Q&A, because the number of people we've got registered for this session means that we expect there to be quite a few questions being raised. So I'm going to start off with a bit of interaction, and I want people to type in to the question box their response to this question. Why do you think employers are making use of presentations more and more as part of the selection process? So if you can just go to the question box, which you'll be able to see on your screen, and start to type in some of the reasons why you think employers are making more and more use of presentations as part of the selection process. So there's somebody's mentioned about engaging and influencing the audience, to see how you deal with pressure, to test your clarity of communication, to demonstrate evidence of research, to test your confidence, a lot of stuff about testing your communication skills. They want to see you can communicate, to judge your communication skills, your knowledge of the subject, to distinguish between candidates, a lot of stuff about how you cope under pressure. Somebody's mentioned about your thought process. People are highlighting it's an opportunity to sell yourself. Somebody's suggesting it's to assist internal candidates. It's to let people see your personality. It's to look at how you approach things individually. Maybe if they're looking for specialist knowledge, it's to do that, to see if you can use PowerPoint. the opportunities stand out. It's time saving, so it saves time asking a lot of questions than suggested. Confidence again coming up again. To show you can actually research and present your ideas clearly. Okay, so I'm just going to give it 10 more seconds before we close off this. To look at time management, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, somebody also mentioned there about testing your logic, so thank you very much for your contributions on that side of things. That's been really helpful. And the good news is, unlike a lot of people, you've actually been really spot on with a lot of the reasons why employers are making more and more use of presentations. And one of the first reasons, as was highlighted by people, is that employers increasingly want to see if you can actually organise your thoughts. They want to see if you can take a whole batch of information and put it together in a logical and coherent way. Now, if you think about it, as accountants, one of our key roles is to make the complex simple. And we know that everyone has got a ton of knowledge. Every person who is on this call is knowledgeable in the subject area. But the reality is not everybody can actually separate the important from the unimportant stuff and put across the complex in a very simple way. As was highlighted, it is about testing communication skills, and it's specifically about testing your verbal communication skills. It's to see how you come across. Somebody mentioned in the question session there about the importance of your personality. And again, it is important that people can see you, your personality, how you come across, whether you're just somebody who's completely frozen in the situation. And a line to that is, yes, in a job in finance, we all know that from time to time we're going to find ourselves in situations where we're going to be in pressurised situations. That might be delivering bad news, it might be in meetings, it might be when we're trying to influence change or turnaround. And the presentation is a great way of seeing how people actually cope under pressure. And finally, this is the one that people often miss. It is actually a way of differentiating people, because what I have found is these days a lot of people are pretty good when it comes to actually handling interview questions. A lot of people have been coached in how to answer interview questions, but less people have been coached in how to actually present their ideas simply. And it is a way of actually differentiating you from other candidates. Now, I want to go on to this thing of the 8 big myths around presentations, because as I said right at the very start, one of the biggest challenges when it comes to presentations is we get ourselves into a frenzy. We really get worried and anxious about the whole thing around presentations. And what I found is that there's really 8 main myths that people have when it comes to presenting. Now, the first one is that your presentation has got to be really slick. Now, you know the kind of thing they say, you can't have any ums, you can't have any ahs, the technology all works perfectly, you come across with a really posh, slick set of words. The reality is what you need to be able to do is come across clearly. Certainly, I mean, I don't have the most dulcet tone of voice, but it's part of my identity. And I recognise that every presentation doesn't need to be really slick, it just needs to get the job done. The second myth is that it's hard to present. Let's be brutally honest, it is challenging to give a presentation. I'm not going to kid on that it isn't hard and it's a bit of a challenge, but this idea that it's actually really difficult, I would say to you, challenge this. It's like everything. You can become highly competent in presentations. You can become highly effective at it if you just practice. And initially, like anything, when you start off, it's going to be difficult, but as time passes by, it will get easier. The next thing is that it needs to be really serious. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting to anyone on this webinar that you can stand up and do a comedy routine when you're giving a presentation, but it's actually okay to build a bit of rapport with the audience. And one of the most simple but effective ways of actually building rapport is simply to smile. So, you know, smiling to the audience generally connects you with them, generally gets you a little bit relaxed. And I think part of the challenge in presentations is just to learn to relax and not to take it too seriously. Number 4 on my list is one of my big favourites, and it's this idea that is often claimed that you're a born presenter. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm guessing if you went along to your local maternity unit and asked how many babies were born in the last week with the presentation gene, they'd probably think you were mad. You know, this idea that your baby number 1 is delivered and the midwife says to the parents, congratulations, little Johnny's got the presentation gene, followed by the next baby, bad news, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, little Jean hasn't got the presentation gene, is complete and utter myth. It is a complete and utter myth. It's one of those things that with practice you become good at. Myth number 5 is that you must not be nervous. Now, unless you are a robot, you are going to be nervous. I have done literally hundreds of presentations. I still get nervous, and the reality is it's not being nervous we need to worry about. It's when we are in a situation when we're not nervous that we've maybe got problems. So what you need to do is you need to learn to use your nerves in a positive way. The next big myth is that people have is that they'll never be any good at giving a presentation. And here is my definition of good in terms of presentation. If it gets you the result that you want, in this case, gets you the job, you're good at it. End of story. You know, it's not about being as good as David Cameron or Barack Obama or any other great speakers you come across. It's being good enough to get the job done. Myth number 7 is that you need to be an extrovert. You know, a lot of people think that the only people who are any good at presentations are really outgoing, big personalities, extroverted. So, you know, the extroverted type person in the Myers-Briggs type categorization. The reality is you just need to be yourself. Don't try and be something you're not. Whenever I present, I always try to just be myself and accept that when it comes to presentations, there's always going to be some people who love it, there's always going to be some people who hate it, and there's going to be the vast majority who actually are completely neutral with it and can be swayed one way or the other. Now, the last thing I want to say is a really important thing, and I've left it to the very end deliberately, because one of the things, and it's one of the biggest mistakes I often see people making when it comes to presentations, is this belief that you can wing it when it comes to presenting. And what do I mean by winging it? Well, I mean putting off doing any real preparation and just turning up and thinking you can just do it. This idea of winging it and just making it up as you go along is the fastest route to disaster, in my view, when it comes to presenting. So if you're somebody who's thinking, well, I can just turn up and just hope for the best, really that is a recipe for disaster. So avoid doing that. Next, I want to talk about the 4 common mistakes that people make when it comes to interview presentations. The first thing is that people grossly underestimate the time which they need to spend on preparation. Now, people always ask me, how long should I be spending, Duncan, on preparation? My rule of thumb is, if it's a presentation you're doing for the first time, as a general rule, you should be spending at least 10 times more on preparation than you are on presenting. So I'm going to say that again, at least 10 times more on preparation than you are on presentation. So what that means is, if you're doing a typical job interview presentation, which is typically a 10 to 15 minute presentation, you need to be spending something between 100 and 150 minutes as a minimum on your preparation. And we know that actually sometimes as accountants, preparation isn't always a thing that we love to get into the detail. The second biggest mistake I see when it comes to presenting is that people have got far too much content, and that can mean they've got too many slides for the amount of time they've got. They've got too much on the slides, and they are completely unrealistic as to what they can cover. Again, going back to your typical 10 to 15 minute interview presentation, realistically, you can only cover 2 or 3 themes in outline in that short period of time. So really be alert that less is actually more when it comes to presentations, particularly in job interviews. The third mistake I see people making is that they try to learn things word for word. And the reason I discourage people from doing that is, if you try to learn things word for word, it's a bit like those days when you were doing your accountancy exams, when you were trying to memorize things. Your focus is on actually what it was. Its focus is on remembering rather than the actual themes. So what I encourage people to do is to focus on the key themes and the key messages you want to get through. And the final mistake that I see people making is that they actually gallop through the presentation. You know, if you know the Roadrunner cartoon character, you know, the one that goes meet meet and then goes whizzing off, a lot of people think that when it comes to presenting, that's the bit of the interview you want to get over and done with as quickly as you possibly can. But resist this temptation. Take your time. You know, don't view it as something to be completed as quickly as you can, but use it, as some people have said, as an opportunity to stand out, to let people know what it is you've actually done and what you can actually offer the prospective employer. So those are 4 common mistakes. I'm sure there's many more that we could cover, but I wanted to pick up on those. Okay, so we're going to have another poll now, and this time we're going to actually ask you to vote on the poll as to which of the 4 common mistakes are you most likely to make when it comes to presenting. So guys just opened the poll so that we can see what's the most common mistakes that you're likely to make when it comes to presenting. And again, the reason why we're actually asking this question is not to make anyone wrong. It's to say to you that if you are making a mistake, once you're conscious that you're making that mistake, then you can do something about it. So we're just going to give you a little, maybe another half a minute or so, just to choose the response that best fits for your situation. Okay, so hopefully everybody has had a chance to respond. So just a quick final countdown: 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So Guy, can we just see the poll results there? Okay, so what we've got in terms of the poll results, we can see that we've got about 12% of people are saying that there is too little time on preparation. We've got about just under 25% who are saying they've got too much content. 17% saying galloping through word for word. Sorry, 17% learning word for word, and 48%, nearly half of people, are saying they're galloping through it. So if you are someone who's seen yourself as galloping through it, then hopefully by the time we get to the end of this webinar, we'll have seen exactly where we stand on this. So thank you very much for your contributions on that side of things. So let's go on to having a look at the issue of handling nerves when it comes to presenting, because often this is an issue for people that people have this worry around nerves when it comes to presenting. I'm just waiting for this to kick in again here. Guy, have you just want to check you've got me back as presenter again?
Yes, you should be presenter, Duncan. Yeah, I think.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Here we go. So let's just have a quick moment around handling nerves here. And there was a perfect example that things don't always go really perfectly when it comes to presenting. So you've seen firsthand the reality in action. First thing I would say to people when it comes to handling nerves is to accept the fact that you're going to be nervous. Going into a job interview, you are going to be anxious, you're going to want to do your best, and if you've got a presentation in there as well, accept the fact that you're going to be nervous. So just don't beat yourself up if you're feeling nervous about it. It's perfectly normal. It's the way everyone else is feeling. The second thing that I suggest for handling nerves is to work on your breathing. Now this is going to be interesting because this is something I would normally get people to stand up and do. I'm sure if you start standing up in your office and doing this right now, people will wonder what the heck you're up to. But essentially, if you can start taking deep breaths, so when you take those deep breaths, what tends to happen is that it slows you down, it gets rid of some of the anxiousness, it gets rid of some of the anxiety. So if you can focus on just doing a few deep breathing exercises before you give a presentation, often you can pop into the toilets before you go into the interview itself. Very easy way of doing that. Another technique is to make use of something called tongue twisters. And some people are probably familiar with tongue twisters. But essentially what tongue twisters are is saying something over and over again at increasing pace. So, for example, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. And then you speed up, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. And you can see I'm starting to get stumbling there already. But you go faster and faster. So Peter Piper is one. She sells seashells on the seashore is another one. And if you're somebody who really likes a challenge, there is one called the least police. I can't even say this one. The least police dismisses us. So that's a really tricky one. But if you can just use some of those tongue twisters, it just gets you your vocal cords working. It gets you into a state and ready for delivery. The other thing is really around pacing yourself. You know, as I said before, you don't want to be galloping through it. You want to take the time to let some points land. It's okay to take a pause from time to time, just to let that point land. And if you're somebody who knows that you're prone to going off at a gallop, what I'd suggest you do is have a prop that you grab onto when you start rushing off at pace. And the easiest thing that I've found is to take something like a glass of water. And when you find yourself in a situation whereby you're starting to go really, really quickly, take a quick sip of water. And again, what that will make you do is just to calm down and slow down. And again, that's a prop that you can also use when it comes to the interview itself. If you know you're someone who leaps into giving answers to interview questions, a quick sip on a drink of water or something else can really make a difference. Okay, so I said to you I was going to share with you a 7-step process. And the 7 steps I'm going to go through with you individually is planning your presentation, preparing, rehearsing, finalising, delivery, getting and using feedback. So we're going to go through each of those in turn so that we can actually start to see what is involved in each of those areas. Now, planning your presentation, it's one of the most important parts of your presentation. What I've found is that it's one of the ones that people, particularly from backgrounds like accountancy, don't always find the most riveting and exciting part of the process. For me, there's a simple thing to remember. Failing to plan is planning to fail. In other words, if you go in, try to wing it, haven't done your homework before you go in, you're going to be in trouble. Now, the first thing you need to be clear about is your objective. Now, obviously, the overall aim in a job interview is to get the job. But in the presentation part, I would suggest that your objective is to get your ideas across coherently, simply, and effectively, and to demonstrate you know enough of what you're talking about in relation to the subject area. The second thing in terms of your planning is to do your research around your audience. You know, it's important to try and tailor what you present to the interview panel, because in the NHS, more and more jobs, and I'd say it's probably the exception these days not to have at least 2 people who you're presenting to. In a lot of jobs, you will have general managers, clinicians, and even in the more senior jobs, non-executives involved in the process. Now, if you know who's going to be on your interview panel, what you can do is try and find out a bit about them, the kind of hates and dislikes. You know, the NHS is quite a small world. Somebody probably knows somebody who you're going to be presenting to. And if it's somebody like a non-executive, you can maybe do a Google search on them. If you know, you can have a look at, find out about them from the organisation's website. There really is things you can do. So doing a bit of research around your audience is an important part of your planning. And then what I always encourage people to do is just to start by brainstorming. Start to generate some ideas around what it is you might actually cover. In that first round brainstorming, don't worry too much about having too much content. It's much easier to skim down the content than it is to be looking for content. So the planning's your first part. Preparing your presentation, the process I use is I always create a basic outline of a presentation. And more these days, people are using PowerPoint. It's almost the thing that people use for presentations. So what I tend to do is I tend to create a series of boxes. And the box is in effect the PowerPoint slide. What I then do is I put a theme as a heading in each of the box. And then I look to populate that with 2 or 3 main points under each theme. And you can see what I've done here. You know, preparing the presentation is the theme. I've created 4 bullet points on this slide, which has the main points. Now, the piece that I'm going to suggest you don't focus all your attention on is the design of the presentation. You know, one of the great things is these days that people can use technology, and it's also a bit of a hazard in my view too, because what tends to happen is lots of people end up playing around with what images will I put on the slides and all that kind of stuff, and what branding and all that kind of stuff, and actually that's not where you should be focusing your attention. If you're someone who you know, is going to be tempted to do this, find yourself a good PA or secretary who can put something together for you. Give them your Word document, tell them what you want, and leave it to them to design. Now, once you've got that basic outline, what I'd suggest is you go to somebody who's a trusted source, somebody who you get on with, and share your thinking. Tell them what you're trying to get across in the presentation, run through the outline you've created, and ask them to give you their honest feedback as to whether it's actually hitting the mark. And if you're sitting down with somebody who's a trusted source, you're going to be receptive to listening to that feedback. Now, step 3 is all about rehearsing. What I have found is that people just do not rehearse enough when it comes to presentations. And the reality is you cannot rehearse enough. There's not such thing as doing too many practice runs. Now, what I suggest to people is you start by doing it on your own. There's a couple of options for doing that. Traditionally on presentation skills course, we used to tell you about standing in front of mirrors and practicing on your own. Sure, you can still do that, but what I'm going to suggest is a couple of things that you might use to support you. The first thing is there is a piece of software that you can download from the internet called Audacity. That's Audacity. And what Audacity allows you to do is to record your voice directly using just a microphone. And if you record, you can check on things like timings, you can see how you're coming across, you can see if you're changing your voice projection, all of that kind of stuff. So Audacity is a good source for doing that. And I think in some of the more up-to-date versions of PowerPoint, I think they might even have recording facilities on there. If you've got something like a flip camera or a video camera, think about recording yourself presenting. The good thing about using something like a video camera is that it lets you see how you come across, it lets you see your body language, and just to see if there's any things that are distracting and getting in the way. You know, I don't have strong views about whether people wave their arms around or not, but I do have a view that you know, you've got to just make sure that you come across naturally and not too wooden. Once you've built your confidence, then you want to be rehearsing in front of others. Now, ideally, if you've got the time, you would do it with 3 different groups. But if you haven't got the time and to do 3 different groups, what I would do is I would get some people in a room to hear your presentation. Some who are your raving fans, the people who love, what I think you're the best boss or the best person around, are going to say positive things. Get some people who are actually naturally critical, and get some people who can actually be influenced one way or the other, depending on what you present. And what I'd actually suggest is you go through your presentation, ask them to give you some specific feedback, and then collate that feedback. And when you're collating feedback, there's an important point to remember. You need to be looking for patterns, not points. And what I mean by that is you need to be focusing your attention on the themes that keep coming up and up over and over again. Those are the things you want to pay attention on, not to one person's personal hobby horse about, the way you speak or the way you've presented something or the style of the slides. Look for patterns, not points. Then you want to get to the point where you finalise your presentation. So by this point you start to take on the feedback, but you want to be still creating something that actually is yours and is owned by you. So when you're looking at the feedback, look at changes that are maybe going to be made to the content, the length of the presentation, and maybe the style of the presentation. Now, in my view, if you've done these first 4 steps well, you're about 80% of the way there to really being successful in your presentation. The delivery piece, in my view, is the 20%. It's all that groundwork, it's all that foundation building stuff that really makes the difference. So let's go on to the delivery phase, because this is often the bit that people want to see as the bit they spend all their time on. Remember, we said this is 10 or 15 minutes, and it's the preparation that makes a difference. Ahead of this, the key thing when you're preparing for delivery is to try and stay calm. We talked about some of the techniques around handling nerves, and find out what it is that gets you grounded, and do that before you deliver your presentation. Now, when it comes to delivery itself, a couple of things to mention. Take your time. If you're somebody who's a galloper, just take your time. You've got plenty of time. If you know how long you're going to take for your presentation, you've timed yourself, you know you can do it. Speak clearly. Try and project your voice. So try and really throw your voice out. Maybe speak, in a higher volume than you normally would. Pace yourself. Don't be frightened to take those pauses. Let things land. Make sure you're maintaining eye contact. And if you've got a panel interview situation, make sure you're panning around and looking at all the different panelists. Just make a point of consciously moving your head round and looking at different people. There's nothing worse than just eyeballing one person consistently. And handling the questions. What I would say to you is, again, as part of your preparation, look at your presentation with fresh eyes and say to yourself, if I was receiving this presentation, what are the questions I would be asking? And the chances are you will get about 50% of those questions spot on or very close to. But the key thing about question handling is to be concise with your answers. They don't want long-winded, drawn-out answers. They want really short, sharp answers. So you just would want to say, well, I think there's 3 main things I would suggest in relation to that, 1, 2, 3. So really try and keep them really, really focused on that. And 6 and 7, stages 6 and 7 I've combined, because the truth is, whenever you do a presentation, you want to actively seek out feedback, and once you've actively sought out feedback, you need to be willing to do something with that feedback. And a lot of people get flummoxed in terms of, you know, what do I ask for feedback on? There's 4 questions I would always say to people. Ask what you did well, ask what they particularly liked, ask them what they didn't like, and ask them what would make it better. If you get feedback on these 4 questions, whether you've been successful or unsuccessful, and then take and act on that, you will get better at giving presentations in interview situations. Again, like earlier on, I mentioned it's important to look at patterns. So if you keep getting the same feedback coming up time and time again, it's really important that you maybe spend a bit of time looking at how you can actually address that challenge. And that might mean sitting down with someone just to get you know, some hints and tips. And again, it doesn't take a lot of time. Just standing and through that one-on-one with somebody can make a huge, huge difference. So, 4 personal success tips from me before we go into the Q&A. The first thing is, don't let your mind run riot when it comes to giving a presentation. You know, so often people allow nerves, anxiety to get in the way of giving a good presentation. As I said, focus on the 80% of preparation and planning and rehearsing, and the 20% is going to be easy. Spend at least 10 times more on preparing than delivery. Practice, practice, practice. There is no such thing when it comes to presentations as practice. That is the thing that makes a difference. You can't over-rehearse when it comes to presentations. And remember, lastly, keep it all in perspective. You need to remember that it's only a job interview. It's only a presentation. So don't actually build it into something bigger than it really is. And I think if you can actually focus on the 7-step process, get used to working with this, and remember these personal success tips, you are going to be on your way to creating and delivering powerful interview presentations on automatic pilot. So we're going to move on to the Q&A. I'm going to hand over to Guy, who's going to take the lead on this part. So back over to you, Guy.
Thank you very much indeed, Duncan. That was very insightful indeed. Some great points being raised there. So hopefully everyone can hear me again. If you think of a question, now is a fantastic time to type it into the question box at the bottom of your panel. I think we've got a few things coming through here. Let me just see what I can bring up. Here's a good one from Rebecca. What if you're asked a question you simply can't answer? What is the best way to deal with that?
If you're asked a question which you simply can't answer,
yes.
just be honest and say you don't know.
Okay, sorry.
It might feel uncomfortable, Guy, actually saying I don't know, but it's better to say you don't know than bluff it. We saw a classic example of that on Wednesday evening for anybody that watches The Apprentice, when Jim was asked by the industry experts about the margins on the fast food restaurant they were running. He clearly, and no one on the team knew the answer, and they made it up, and it was blatantly obvious it had been made up. Just be honest. People are not going to hold you. I mean, they're going to accept that you're not going to have thought about everything. Okay, yes, that sounds sensible, certainly.
Here's another one here from Carol Day. If you're being interviewed for a specialist role with a panel that includes a non-specialist, at what level would you pitch the specialist content?
It's a good question. I mean, what I would always try to do is I would keep it. If you've got to have mentioned specialist stuff, by all means cover the specialist stuff. But for the non-specialist, try and find things that are very similar, that people can actually understand and relate to. So something from day-to-day life or metaphors are good things to use. I'll give an example, Guy, because it's probably the easiest way to demonstrate it. I remember when payment by results was being introduced into the NHS, and I was giving a presentation to our organisation about payment by results, and I was wanting to get the message across to people about the importance of clinical coding. And how I basically explained clinical coding and the importance of clinical coding to payments was to make the comparison between barcodes on a supermarket. So, and I use the analogy of if you go into Sainsbury's and you pick up one of those, big giant screen, 50-inch screen TVs, and you take up to the counter, or you'll wheel it up to the counter, and the person scans it, and the barcode on it is wrong, and you get charged for a can of baked beans. Sainsbury's is going to be in trouble pretty quickly. And I use that kind of practical example to demonstrate that the clinical code was the equivalent of Sainsbury's barcode, and if we didn't get that right, then we were going to be underpaid as an organisation. So I think if you can find things for the non-specialist, everyday examples are always good to bring things to life. And it's all about balance, because I really think that if it's a really specialist role, they will be using the presentation as just one aspect of the selection process. There'll be plenty of other opportunities to drill down into the detail. So I think making that complex simple is still key.
Okay, fantastic. A couple of people asking about bringing notes in, for example, if they like to either prepare notes beforehand, before they make the presentation, or if they just like to have a bit of a crib sheet. Is there anything right or wrong about that particular approach?
Personally, I see no problem with the crib sheet. What I often would do in when I'm giving a presentation myself is I actually print out the presentation as a handout. So basically all the slides are on 1 or 2 pages, ideally on 1 page if you can. If you've only got, which most people probably will have in an interview presentation, maybe a maximum of 9 slides, you can get that onto 1 handout, and you can just put some salient points down on the handout, and it's there as a prop if you need it. Again, the one thing I would say to people is don't go in with copious notes and read from the notes. Don't stand up with those little place cards. To me, these days, you really, if you're given a 10 or 15-minute presentation and you're focusing on your themes, you shouldn't need those detailed word-for-word things. Because remember, I think what people often do, Guy, is they think they're presenting the news at 10. They're not presenting news at 10. They don't need to be slick. They're not reading from an auto cue. So people will cut you some slack. So I think just focus on the themes. But a crib sheet, I don't think anybody's going to hold against you if you want that as, I guess, a little safety prop.
Okay, fantastic stuff. Is a good one here from Kay Rothwell. She's asking, could you expand on how you can use your nerves in a positive way?
Yeah, I certainly can. I mean, I think that what happens when you get nervous, you get anxious, and what you can really do is you can either, with nerves, you can find yourself in a situation whereby you allow it gets in the way of you actually opening your mouth and kind of just expressing what you want to express. The use it in a positive way is actually to use the nerves as a fuel. So actually use it as a motivator, something that really kind of charges you up. So if you can take the breathing exercises, the tongue twisters, and just really get yourself in, using those nerves as a positive, then it can really make a difference. So the point about using them in a positive way is just to say, okay, accept the normal, and then use the nerve as a source of motivation.
Okay, fantastic. I suppose in a similar way that actors would, or people who are about to go on stage.
Absolutely, sports people do. You know, I mean, a lot of sports people use things like visualizations. So they actually visualize what the outcome's going to be. So sometimes for some people, if you're a visual person, just getting yourself into this, visualizing yourself giving the great presentation, can do it for some people.
Okay. I mean, Justin's just written in, just while we've been talking about that, saying when he's nervous, he tends to pace around. I mean, is there a problem about sort of walking around during your presentation?
Personally, again, I mean, I think that personally, I don't think there is a big problem on that. I think you've just got to be like everything, it's using it in moderation. I mean, you know, what you don't want to be like is one of these things that's kind of running around like something out of Benny Hill. But at the same time, you know, a bit of movement's fine, as is, you know, using your hand gestures, waving your arms and all that kind of stuff, all in moderation. If that's your style, don't allow your style to be compromised because you feel you've got to do things in a certain way. You know, sometimes I've been in situations where people, I've gone in and said, well, I'm not going to do a PowerPoint presentation, and people are actually relieved.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, there's a few people asking as well here about bringing in, say, for example, a handout of the slides to be used, or a printed version for your audience to hold and to look at. I suppose that potentially may depend on the type of presentation you're giving, but are there any hard and fast rules about that?
Again, I don't think there is any hard and fast rules. I mean, sometimes it's beneficial to give them something because they can actually doodle their own notes down on them. So if you've got people, you know, who like doodling, and quite often people do like to doodle, it is worthwhile doing that. I see no problem with giving out your presentation. And again, what you might want to do so that they're not swarmed with, you know, 9 pieces of paper each, is maybe just give them a handout, so just give them the slides as, you know, as you leave. But what I would encourage people to do is another option is to give them the presentation at the end. So leave it with them so they can just remember you as you know, as you finish your presentation. Because really what you want them to do is focus on you, because they're not just going to want to know they're not just going to want to know about the content, they're going to want to know about you as a person.
True, true. Actually, Kathleen's just raised a very good point that it's a good backup if technology fails.
Yes.
So you've got something to read from if all goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the worst comes to the worst, then yeah, I mean, it is good to have as a backup, and definitely worthwhile having.
What happens if you find yourself, you know, if nerves take over when you're in the middle of a presentation and you feel yourself going completely off track? What's the best way to reel it back in again?
What I find personally when you get off track is just to get yourself grounded as quickly as possible. So even if it's just a quick pause, or even if you feel you've built up rapport with people, say, you know, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought there. That's okay to say that. You know, I've lost my train of thought there. Or some people would suggest, you know, if you're really feeling you've got a better rapport with the people, is ask them what was the last thing you said.
Okay. Yeah.
I've seen some people actually, you know, use that technique. Say, what was the last thing I said? So it just gives you that, you know, few seconds to get yourself back on track.
I mean, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, it could be slightly tricky in an interview situation, but you know, if you do, just get yourself grounded, get yourself back on track. Maybe use one of your sip of water to get yourself grounded again.
Okay, well, I think we've got time for one more question, so I'm going to go with this one. In a sort of typical sit-down interview, obviously, you know, in an interview, generally body language is very important, isn't it, both for the interviewer and for yourself? Is this more difficult when you're sitting down and giving a presentation, both to read and to display your own body language?
Is it more difficult sitting down? Possibly yes. I mean, it's a different kind of challenge. But if you know you're going to be, I mean, I guess the trick really is to try and make sure that you're still using all of the same techniques, even though you're sitting down. And if you think there's a possibility, you may actually be invited to sit and give your presentation as opposed to stand. Practice doing both. Practice standing and practice sitting down, because it is a slightly different dynamic.
Sure. Okay, well, we're just about out of time now, so we're going to end it here. Thank you very much once again, Duncan, for that insightful session, and indeed to all of you that have joined us on the call today, making this a record-breaking webinar for HFMA in terms of attendees. A very quick reminder, you can access a recording of this webinar via the HFMA website, and you'll all be emailed a link as soon as this is ready. We're hoping to get this up today, so expect an email from us. Along with that, there'll be a feedback form. I would be very grateful if you could fill it in, as this does help us to prepare for future sessions. And finally, just a very quick trail for the final webinar in this series, which is going to be on the subject of dealing with and managing change. And that's going to happen in 2 months' time on Thursday, the 15th of September, between 10 and 11 a.m. Duncan and myself will be there, and we would very much value your company. Full details will be on the HFMA